Hi, welcome back to your virtual learning space. This is video 7. So, we are going to move into zone 2. Now, zone 2, designated by the yellow in this diagram, is going to be the keyhole beds, the potato bag, and the growing plants are the vertical space that I'm using. So, in zone 2, we have our main crop, we have larger grazing areas for animals, and we have veggie gardens. These don't really apply to my scale. So I've scaled these ideas down to make my zone 2 fit into my area. In my zone 2, I've got peas and strawberries. So you can see here, this is the flower box that I planted for my mom 3 weeks ago. And we can see the peas are really starting to have a go off it. They're climbing along that back edge there. And then we've got our strawberries hanging all over the place, and we're coming towards the end of the flower season now, and I can see probably between 15 and 20 strawberries per plant, and I've got about 16 strawberry plants dotted all over this property. So we are going to be inundated with strawberries, which is fantastic. I don't need to take another picture of the potato bag. We all remember it. It's sitting there by my shed. And then this week, I took the time to put in keyhole growing beds. I'm going to take a good bit of time to talk about these in just a minute. We need to start talking about soil first. So I haven't talked about soil at all yet, because number one, we've been in zone 0, which doesn't have any soil. And we've been in zone 1, which is so close to the house that the soil is normally just a compost mix. So it's not normal that we would be building soil in our zone 1. Now, that's not to say we don't build soil in our zone 1. It's absolutely a case in some systems. But when we move out into zone 2, this is where we really start to experience soil. Last week when we were talking about zone 0, we talked about the importance of catching and storing energy, right? And we use batteries to store energy in an electric system. But the ecosystems are batteries for climate. So they store our sunlight, they store our rain, they store the things that the climate brings to our system for later use. They do this by encasing it in life, right? So plants grow, and that is as a result of the environment that they're living in, and they bank that energy for us. They might make food for us, or food for themselves, or use it for reproduction, but either way, they are storing that energy. Now, soil is the basis for all ecosystems. Everything that lives on the land on this planet has the base of its food in soil. That doesn't matter if it's a carnivore, it doesn't matter if it's a herbivore, everything starts from the soil. This really simple diagram that I have here is a breakdown of soil and what lives where, right? So if we start from the very bottom where we've got burrowing animals and microbes, we might call this the subsoil. There's very little life goes on in this soil, in what we would understand as life. And the subsoil isn't as active as the soil higher up in the system, right? So the next level we have is that slightly lighter brown, and we could call this the intermittent stage, right? So this is where a lot of fungi will live, and we'll get like a transition from our subsoil to our main living soil. And then moving up to the lightest brown, this is our topsoil. This is the area where all the life happens. We've got plant roots and insects and fungi. We've also got the macro invertebrates, which are like slugs and snails and worms, all these things. And our topsoil is probably only about 6 inches thick. So like not that big. But that's where all the life happens that leads to, everything from hedgehogs to elephants. It all starts with soil. Soil is analogous to an organism. So what I mean by that is we can consider the soil to be one organism. We need to feed it, we need to help it breathe, and we need to protect it. It is analogous to one organism in the same way our skin is one organ, right? Good soil has a crumb structure. So when I say good soil, I'm talking about living, um, bio bioactive soil. The crumb structure is actually like when we pick it up and we rub it in our hands. We can see the crumbs. They're like they're like little gooey balls. We could crush them with our fingers. We're not talking about stones. We're talking about little bacterial colonies, little microbes all living together, making these little tiny, what would you call them? It's like a little hotel, right? And they all live together, they all live in their own little communities. But what the crumb structure leads to is they stack on top of each other with air gaps. So it allows air to pass through our soil. It allows water to pass through our soil. It allows the things that life needs to be infiltrated through the system. Another thing we were looking for when we're testing out our soil is we want it to smell right. So we all intrinsically know what good soil smells like. It's kind of like a sweet smell. And when you smell it, like you know it. You're like, ooh, this is good soil. Even if you've never put your foot on a farm, this is something that's like built into humans. The last thing we need to talk about when we're talking about good soil is pH. So the pH scale goes from from 1 to 13. We've got acid at 1 and we've got alkaline at 13. In the middle, we've got 7, which is neutral. It means that it's not acidic and it's not alkaline. The place where we want to garden is somewhere between 6, 6.5, and 7. That is like the happy medium for most plants. Now, there are some plants that want it more acid, and there are some plants that want it more alkaline. And we can adjust our soil as we need to. But for most of our plants and for most of our life in the soil, somewhere between 6 and 7 is normally the happiest place to be.
What plants like the most acidic soil?
So things like pine trees love acidic soil, and they actually create acidic soil around their own roots by dropping their leaves, by dropping their pine cone or their pine needles, right? Another thing which really loves acid soil is blueberries. I know this because I like blueberries, and growing blueberries is almost impossible without an acid soil. So they want to sit somewhere around the 5.8, which is quite acidic by normal gardening standards. Each shovelful of life contains more life forms than people that have ever existed. This one blew my mind because if you think about every time you've put your shovel into the ground and grabbed a big wad of soil and tossed it over your shoulder, be like, okay, that's done. You've literally started or ended the life of trillions of little things. So there's little bacteria all the way up to worms and bugs and insects, all the things. Trillions of them exist in every shovelful of soil. So it is very important to value every shovelful of our soil. If we're going to take the time to build it, we want to value that soil. We don't want to call it dirt. Really hate that word. So how do we build soil? What are we doing when we're building soil? So dig a hole in most people's garden and this is what you're going to see. That little black stripe right along the top, that's our topsoil. That's the place where life is happening in this particular soil sample. Everything below that could be considered subsoil. Now, for scale, we're looking at little tiny plants that are growing out, right? So we're talking about like maybe 4 mil of soil, 4 millimeters of soil. Everything below that is not bioactive. There is not much happening. So how do we enliven our soil? How do we bring more life to it? We want it to look like this. So like this is nice, thick, black soil. We can see from looking at it that has that crumb structure I was talking about. It's also got bugs and worms and fungus and all sorts of things going on. So how do we transition from the picture on the left to the picture on the right? The first step is to let it breathe. most of the soil that we are going to find in the world is going to have been compressed. So it's got all the air gaps squeezed out of it. That means that it can't breathe. So soil breathes on a natural daily cycle. As the moon comes up over our heads, it pulls the soil towards it. The gravity of the moon pulls the soil up. And as it moves away, that falls back down. Slowly breathing in and out, right? So that allows the system to off gas, to let out the gases that are produced by our little friends all living in there. But it also allows it to suck in new air. So as it expands, as it gets pulled towards the gravity of the moon, it allows more air to infiltrate into it. And then as it falls back down, very gently squeezes out the very gently off gases, whatever gases are created within our soil. We want to feed it. And the easiest way to feed soil is to first open it up. So we take like our gardening fork and we stick it into the ground right down to the prongs. And we just rock it back and forth, side to side. And we do that all over our ground. We do that everywhere we can. Because what that does is it creates little air pockets. It creates little areas for our life to expand out into. And we can feed that soil by adding organic material. The soil is all teeth. It just eats. And if we give it food, it will grow. It will become more enlivened. It will have more life in it. The last thing we got to do is we got to protect it. So I made an analogy earlier that like the soil is kind of like the skin, right? So we can't go out in the sun, us white people, without putting on some sunscreen, right? We need to protect ourselves from the sun. Now, this is true of our soil as well. It needs to be protected from the harsh effects of the climate. So let's say a heavy rain or a lot of wind or very, very exposed soil will get attacked by the sun, and that will sterilize the top of the soil. So we need to protect our soil from those, and we use mulching to do that. And we'll talk about mulching as we go on, but that's just like a little caveat. We need to protect our soil from the climate. Another way that we can start to move the soil in the direction that we want it to go is we can make very careful additions. So like we were saying a minute ago, we can make our soil. So if our soil was too acidic, we could add lime during the process of opening up the soil with the garden fork. We can sprinkle lime. And what that will do is it'll pull its pH back towards 7. Right? But if we had too much alkaline, we can add sulfur, and sulfur will pull us in the other direction, right? And in that way, we can get ourselves to that nice happy place, somewhere between 6 and 7, which we were talking about is where most of the life happens. Now, for example, if like Amanda, you wanted to grow some blueberries, you'd have to put down some sulfur or some pine needles to make that soil a little bit more acidic. We make soil for each individual plant if we want to have them thrive. Another addition we can make is organic compost. So we want our compost to be as alive as possible. Now, we can all buy compost at the garden center. I mean, it's absolutely fantastic stuff. But if we can have it be more alive than that, all the better. So things like my worm composting system puts out a really, really bioactive compost. The stuff is alive. There's tons going on. And I can put in small amounts of that into my soil, and they make these little islands of life, and they spread out, and they'll turn my soil, for want of a better description, into a much more lively experience. So they'll turn it from this picture on the left to this picture on the right. Lastly, if we have too much clay, we can add bentonite or gypsum. So this is something that I had to do in my own garden. That's why I wanted to bring it up really quickly. While I was opening up my soil with the fork, I actually just spread bentonite on it, because what that does is it helps the clay particles to bind together.
That allows,
Also a good detox.
yeah, it really passes through the system, right?
Doesn't it expand to 40 times its weight?
Yeah.
So what it does is by going into the system, by going into the soil, it sucks all that clay together and it balls it up, so that we're creating like an inert form of that crumb structure that we were talking about. We get the soil to just bind together, because clay soil, if left to its own devices, will become a pond. It reduces the amount of water that can infiltrate through it, and hence we don't get water going down to the level where we need it for our worms or our insects. They don't get to penetrate that soil, and it dies. Is everyone getting this? Making sense? Cool. So this week I took the time to make a keyhole bed system in my back garden, right? Keyhole refers to the shape of these beds, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But first I want to talk about the basics of building our soil in this bed, right? So this is going to be a no-dig system. I am not going to dig up and turn over this soil ever. I want this soil to build on itself in these beds, slowly breaking down, and I'll keep adding to the top of it. I'm not going to dig into it and turn it over. I'm also not going to compress this soil. I've set up the paths in such a way that I never have to stand on or lean on this soil, so it never takes the weight of a human being, which is enough to crush all the soil under our feet, right? We compress it, we squeeze all the air out of it, we squeeze all the water out of it, and then when we step off, it can't re-expand. It can't pop back up of its own accord. So we're using the minimum amount of path because we want the maximum amount of growing space. And the way we've done this, we can see here, if I was standing on the red spot, I can reach everything in that red hatched area. Hence the shape. It's called a keyhole bed because it kind of looks like a keyhole in a door. By standing on that one rock, I can access all of that area. But you can see there's like little areas on both sides of the bed that I can't reach. So on the other side of the path, on the yellow, I can stand and I can reach my strawberries in the back, but I can also reach the left-hand side of that bed that I couldn't reach from the red spot. And the same is true of the blue. So from the blue spot, I can reach my rhubarb and like that right-hand edge of the right bed. But from standing on one of those three spots, I can reach everything in my garden without having to stand on it, without having to put my weight on it in any way. This is conserving resources. It's using our area to the most efficient, but it's also conserving resources because I've got one sprinkler set up for this system, and you can see that it's like right in the middle of the frame. That one sprinkler does this whole garden bed, and that's roughly 34 foot of running garden bed that I have there. So that would be 6 sprinklers in a longer system, in a system that was just laid out in a straight line. But because I've wrapped that edge again, I've got so much happening, I've got so much contained that when it gets watered, it all gets watered at once, which is really, really good. It means that I'm not watering it like too much. In my beds, I have strawberries, peas, kale, nasturtiums. I don't know if people know about nasturtiums, but they are the tastiest flowers on the planet. They are really, really tasty little beautiful flowers. They've got like a peppery flavor to them. And I'm hoping they kind of half take over one of these beds because it's lovely to have them. They're a long-term feature, a really, really good feature in any garden. I've got beetroot, lettuces, radishes, broccoli, garlic, onions, potatoes, and rhubarb, all growing in this tiny little space in my back garden. Everything is crammed in on top of each other because what I want to do is I want to harvest seeds. So I was talking about last week in Zone Zero that I have a microgreen setup in my house, and that basically runs on seeds. Now, if I grew broccoli with the intention of eating broccoli florets, I would have to have a much bigger system. But if I want to get broccoli microgreens, I need seeds. So what I've done is I've really created a very strong competition for my broccoli plants so that I get the very strongest broccoli plants to come up. And I'm going to let them go all the way through their life cycle so that they go to seed. And then I'm going to harvest the seeds and use them over the year. So rather than using the broccoli once, taking a big broccoli floret, it lasts maybe 2 days in my house and it's gone. I'm going to take all the seed from this system and I'm going to use it over the year, drawing out my harvest. The same as I'm going to try with the radishes. I'm also going to try it with the beetroot and the kale. Any questions? Cool. So how did I make it? You can see here I just had some plants that I had started in various different containers. They were scattered all over my back garden. My mom was very annoyed. So I'm condensing the plants that I've started into this small little system that I have set up here. I just laid out the bricks so that I knew I had enough bricks. And I kind of got like a feel for how I wanted it to be, where I wanted things to live. After that, I took all this off and I cut the grass. And I put down thick layers of cardboard. So for the whole area, I laid down two layers of cardboard. And after each layer, I wet it down really, really well. Now, the point of this cardboard is twofold. It is, number one, it'll stop things from growing up. For example, grass, which I don't want growing into my system. But it also creates kind of like a pan where water collects. So before the water gets to the soil below, it's going to soak that cardboard, and that cardboard will slowly let it back into my soil. On top of that cardboard, where we have paths, you can see I've started to lay down mulch. So I'm putting bark mulch directly onto my cardboard. Now, most people who grow in keyhole beds or lay sheet mulching use straw. But I wasn't really allowed to use straw in my parents' back garden because it makes a big mess and they didn't want it to look like a farm, and there was a lot of argument about it. So I'm actually experimenting with bark mulch. I've never tried it with bark mulch before. I'm going to see how it goes and I'll be able to report back whether it works well or not. So after putting down the mulch on the path areas that I've created, I started to lay out the bricks and get the beds ready. So I laid out the bricks and put out the paths first so that I could walk on the whole area. Once I start laying the soil, I can't walk on those areas. So it's like painting yourself out of a room. You don't want to paint yourself into a corner. You want to paint yourself towards the door so that you can move out. So I am laying the soil so that I am moving away from it. And what I've done is I've taken some natural soil from my garden and I've mixed it with some compost that I bought at my local garden centre. I've also taken a small bit of my worm juice and I've used that to start the process of breaking down this soil. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay one layer of soil on both of these beds. Then I'm going to take a thick layer of compost, of mulch, and I'm going to put that on top. So that's our protection. That's going to protect our soil from invaders, number one. It's going to protect us from the sun. It's going to protect us from the heavy rains. All these things that could impact our soil and compress it or not allow it to be as full of life as possible. All of these things will be mitigated by that thick layer of bark mulch. And then when it comes to planting, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to open up little pockets in that mulch and I plant directly into them with a compost pocket, for want of a better word, right? So I'm taking the plant in its potting medium, in whatever I've started the seed, and I'm putting it into the mulch so that it is like an island of soil, but it can still interact with the soil below it. That being said, nothing will take in the mulch. So we're not talking about weeding or like it's essentially an inert medium so that we don't have to do weeding, so that we don't have to turn our soil every year. This is food for the soil as well as being its protection. It's like moisturizer, sun cream, and food all in one. And this is how it turned out. I'm pretty happy with it. It's going to be a very productive system, and it took me the bones of 3 hours work, I think, give or take 3 hours. Now there was probably 20 hours of thinking and planning and like working it out, and where does everything go, and where am I going to get some bricks, or what am I going to make it out of. But all in all, it was about 3 hours of actual work because I planned it out in advance. Any questions on keyhole beds? Cool.
Is there one question? I have a small balcony. Is there anything that can grow in the shade?
There's lots that actually prefer the shade. It depends on what you're looking for. Ferns are herbs.
Yeah.
See your herbs. It's about what you eat.
Get a little bit of sun, but not much. I get some sun in the morning.
So if you get some sun in the morning, that means it's probably either an east or a northeast facing balcony, right? Well, that's the first thing to work out, right? So, and then it's about just typing into Google shade tolerant herbs, and you'll get a big list, and you'll be able to pick from that what you would eat yourself. Yeah. And you can also use the vertical space in a balcony. If you've got one wall that catches the morning sun, and then subsequently for the rest of the day it gets shade, you could grow up that wall. And we're going to talk about vertical space here now in a minute, and this will really apply. So, vertical space. Normally when we're dealing with vertical space, we're going to start off with infrastructure. So we need things for the plants to grow up. We need things for them to grab onto and things for them to move up along. So there's two examples here in this picture. We've got bamboo kind of set up against the edge. So it's kind of like standing out in front. And then we've also got like little tripods, right? So peas love these little bamboo tripods. They grow up them super quick, and they do it as quickly as they'll grow up a grid like this. So when it comes to investing in infrastructure, the less you have to invest, the better. If you have to buy 3 pieces of bamboo, that's going to cost you an awful lot less than a big mesh screen or a big piece of wire, crossed wire, that's going to form a net for our plants to grow up. Whatever you can get your hands on to just get them started on the upward trajectory will work. So when we're dealing with these species that we want to grow upwards, we're normally going to see these little, like, they look like little claws. And what the plant does is it takes that tendril and it swings it like a lasso in really, really slow motion. Like if you speed this up 10 or 100 times, you can see it happening, but we can't see it happening in our attention span. What it'll do is it'll swing that little lasso until it grabs onto something, and then it twists it. So if you look at the center of the picture, you can see it's like little pigtails. They like twist up and they grab on and they become anchors. So it uses that anchor to lasso up to the next level and lasso up to the next level. And that's how it grows up a medium. Species that work really well at this are peas and beans. Cucumber is another really good one. Grapes and hops are a bit more of like a bigger system. So like I don't have room for grapes or hops in my system, but they are absolutely fantastic producers. Again, we're conserving resources and maximizing space. So it's very important to take into account that not everybody has the space, like Amanda was saying, to grow on a horizontal surface, right? We don't have much horizontal space, but we could have a lot of vertical space that we could use, and it is just as productive as if you folded it down on the ground and it was horizontal. So a small wall can represent 20 square meters or 20 square feet of growing bed, like just like that, just by acknowledging that that vertical space is just as useful as a horizontal space. Any questions about vertical gardening? No? Cool. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you got a ton of value out of this video. Don't forget to subscribe so that you can stay up to date with my most recent material. Have a great day.